Imagine a landscape that is so desolate, so utterly devoid of color, that your mind actually starts to fracture just trying to process the sheer emptiness. We're not talking about, a snowy day in winter. We are talking about the high Arctic in the middle of the 19th century.
It's a place where the sun literally doesn't rise for months at a time. I mean, we were talking about temperatures dropping so low that mercury freezes solid. You could hammer a nail with a piece of frozen mercury.
That's incredible.
And the silence. The silence is heavy enough to crush you.
It sounds absolutely terrifying. And today, we aren't just looking at the maps or the ice charts. We're really looking at the breaking point of human psychology. We are diving back into Pierre Berton's masterpiece, The Arctic Grail.
Specifically, we're zooming in on the uh, really turbulent middle years of the 19th century. So for those of you following along in the book, this deep dive is going to focus exclusively on chapters 7, 8, and 9.
Right. And the mission for this deep dive is to understand a huge shift. We're watching how the search for the Northwest Passage, which started as this, optimistic hunt for a trade route.
Right, a commercial venture.
Exactly, and how it morphed into a desperate search for the Lost Franklin expedition.
And then how that search eventually mutated again into something else entirely.
Yeah.
A frantic, almost ego-driven race for the North Pole.
It really feels like a tragedy in 3 acts.
That is the perfect way to describe it. We have mutiny, we have a widow's crusade, and we have, murder.
So to give everyone a roadmap, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to look at Theme 1, Desperation and Mutiny. This is the story of Elisha Kent Kane, an American doctor who gets his ship frozen in, and it leads to a split crew and what has to be one of the most bizarre treaties in history with the local Inuit.
Then we'll move to Theme 2, The Widow's Crusade. This is the story of Lady Jane Franklin. She portrays herself to the world as this, weak and defenseless woman, but in reality, she is an iron-willed PR genius who literally shamed the British Admiralty into action.
She basically kept the search alive single-handedly. And finally, Theme 3, Murder on the Ice. The strange life and death of Charles Francis Hall, a printer turned explorer who was, it seems very likely he was poisoned by his own crew.
And if that's not enough, we also get a group of survivors drifting on a piece of ice for 6 months.
It's just unbelievable.
So yes, settle in. We are entering the Victorian mindset, where naval discipline clashed with the brutal reality of the Arctic, and we're refusing to live like the so-called savages. The Inuit often meant a death sentence.
Okay, let's start with Elisha Kent Kane. It's August 1854. Set the scene for us. Where is he, and what's the situation?
Kane is trapped in a place called Rensselaer Harbor, right on the Greenland coast. He's aboard the brig Advance. And when I say trapped, I don't just mean they're waiting for a change of the wind. They have been stuck for a full year. The ship is frozen solid into the ice.
So the ocean is basically a rock around them.
Exactly. The ship is effectively a building on land at this point.
Right.
And the conditions on board, they're just absolutely nightmarish.
Break that down for us. I mean, what does life look like on the Advance after a full year locked in the ice?
It's a house of horrors. Scurvy is rampant. And we often hear the word scurvy and we think, okay, they need some orange juice or something. But the reality of it is so visceral.
It's not just bleeding gums, is it?
No. It's a total breakdown of the body's connective tissue. So yes, men's gums are bleeding, their teeth are loosening, but terrifyingly, old wound scars from childhood start to reopen.
That is a detail that always gets me. Your old scars literally open up again.
Yes. The body can no longer maintain the repairs it made years ago. So these men are lethargic, they're depressed, they're in constant pain. But the psychological strain is arguably even worse. The crew is deeply divided on what to do.
And this is where the mutiny aspect comes in, right? Because you have Kane, the commander. He wants to stay with the ship, but a pretty big chunk of the crew wants to bail.
Correct. You have to understand the pressure cooker environment. I mean, darkness for months on end. The same faces, day in, day out, the same smells. The crew splits almost right down the middle on what the best strategy is. 9 men decide to stay with the ship, to stick it out with Kane. But 8 men, led by a guy named Peterson, they decide they're done. They want to make a desperate run for Upernavik.
And Upernavik isn't exactly next door, is it?
Not at all. It's a Danish settlement, about 1,100 kilometers south. That's, nearly 700 miles. In their condition weakened by scurvy, with limited supplies, it's essentially a suicide mission.
But that tells you everything you need to know about their state of mind.
It does. They would rather walk 1,000 kilometers across the ice than spend one more winter on that ship.
So how does Kane handle this? A traditional Royal Navy captain, a British one, might have these guys court-martialed, maybe even shot for mutiny.
Kane is an interesting figure. He is a doctor by training, not a career naval officer, and he's an American, so he has a different approach to discipline. He absolutely views these men as deserters and traitors. He writes about it with just intense bitterness in his journals.
But he lets them go.
He lets them go. He realizes that keeping them there against their will would be, and this is his term, a morale plague.
A morale plague. That's a powerful phrase.
Isn't it? If he forces them to stay, their negativity, their fear, their rebellion, it will infect the rest of the crew who are trying to stay loyal. It would poison the already toxic atmosphere. So he decides to let them go.
But he does something very lawyerly first.
He does. It's one of the strangest scenes. He gathers everyone together, and he forces the departing men to sign a document. It's a formal document acknowledging that he, Kane, is not liable for their fate. It's a very formal, almost legal separation.
That is so bizarre. You're in the middle of nowhere, you're freezing to death, civilization is thousands of miles away, and you're signing liability waivers.
It shows you how much they were trying to maintain the structures of civilization, even in the middle of that wilderness. It was about order. Kane wanted it on the record, for history, for the Navy Department, for his own conscience, that he didn't abandon them, they abandoned him.
So the 8 men leave. What happens to the group that stays behind on the Advance?
Kane knows they can't survive another winter like the last one. They can't heat the whole ship. They just don't have the cold or the wood. So he decides to create a ship within a ship.
A ship within a ship? What does that even mean?
It's ingenious, really. They take the quarterdeck area, a small part of the ship, and they insulate it heavily with moss and turf that they spend weeks digging up from the nearby shore. They essentially build an igloo inside the vessel.
Wow.
They strip the decking from the upper deck to use as firewood.
Yeah.
They create this small, enclosed, insulated space where all 10 of them live, eat, and sleep together.
It sounds cozy in a really terrible way, but you mentioned something in the notes that just makes my skin crawl. The rats.
Ah, yes. The rats. You
Yeah.
cannot talk about the Advance without talking about the infestation. The ship was overrun. And here's the sort of physics of the situation. Because Kane concentrated all the heat in this one small area, this moss-lined box, every living thing on that ship wanted to be in there.
Including the rats.
Including hundreds, maybe thousands of rats. So they are living in this moss-lined box with swarms of rats.
That's horrifying.
Everywhere. Rats in their beds, rats getting into the food, rats running over their faces while they slept. They just became part of the ecosystem. Kane writes about them chewing on their furs, their woolens, their shoes, even his precious scientific specimens.
I think I might have joined the deserters just to get away from the rats. That sounds like a specific kind of psychological torture.
It absolutely was. Yeah, at one point, Kane gets so desperate he tries to asphyxiate them with charcoal smoke. He seals up the hold, lights a bunch of charcoal, and tries to gas them out. But he nearly kills the crew in the process from the fumes. And the rats, of course, survive. They just had to live with them.
Unbelievable. So speaking of the deserters, how did their 1,100-kilometer trek go?
Predictably terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, they were ill-equipped, they were weakened, and they were just not experienced in that kind of travel. They didn't get very far before realizing they were going to die, but they ran into a group of Inuit, led by a man named Kalutuna.
This is a name we need to remember, right? Kalutuna. He's a leader and a shaman.
Yes, an Anjitak or shaman, a very powerful figure in his community. The deserters become entirely dependent on Kalutuna and his people for their survival. They're essentially parasites on this Inuit community, and this leads to one of the most disgraceful episodes in Arctic exploration.
This is the Laudanum incident.
It is. The deserters are starving. They realize they can't walk to Upernavik. What they want is transport. They want dogs and sleds to get further south, and the Inuit have them. So the deserters hatch this plot.
This is just awful.
It is. They invite the Inuit to a meal. They make a big pot of soup. And into this soup, they pour a massive amount of laudanum.
Laudanum being liquid opium, they drug them.
They drug their hosts to knock them out so they could steal their dogs and their sleds. Dr. Hayes, who was one of the deserters, a medical doctor, mind you, actually describes hugging Kalutuna as the drug took effect, whispering the word for sleep into his ear.
That is just incredibly dark. It's a betrayal of the highest order. Did it even work?
In the short term, yes. They stole the sleds and dogs while the Inuit were unconscious. But this is where the supposed superiority of the white explorer completely falls apart. They were incompetent. They couldn't manage the dog. Dog driving is a very high skill. They didn't know how to hunt. They drove the dogs into the ground.
So they failed.
They failed completely to reach safety. Broken, starving, and utterly humbled, they had to crawl back to Kane's ship.
So the prodigal sons return. How does Kane react? I mean, he made them sign that waiver. He has every right to just turn them away.
He takes them back because he has to.
Yeah.
He can't just let them die on the ice right outside the ship. That crosses a moral line, even for him. But he is furious. He writes in his diary, "God of heaven, this makes my blood boil," and he creates a strict caste system on the ship.
A caste system on a tiny, frozen-in ship.
Yes. There are now the faithful, those who stayed, and the unfaithful, the deserters. The unfaithful have to eat separately. They're forbidden from performing any ship duties. They're treated like guests, but very, very unwanted guests. It was incredibly tense. You have these two groups trapped in a rat-infested box, just hating each other.
And all the while, everyone is getting sicker and sicker with scurvy.
Right. And this brings us to Kane's relationship with the Inuit. It's so complex. Kane writes about them with this typical Victorian disdain. He calls them dirty and degraded. He's physically repulsed by their diet.
But he needs them.
Desperately. He finally realizes that to cure the scurvy, they have to eat fresh meat. The salted pork and biscuit from the ship's stores won't do it. They need fresh seal or walrus. And since his white crew are too weak and unskilled to hunt effectively, they need the Inuit to provide it for them, or they have to eat the rats.
Wait, back up. They ate the rats.
They did. Kane admits in his journals that he had to adopt the Inuit diet to survive. That meant eating raw, frozen seal meat and, yes, rat meat. He says the fresh meat was the only thing that kept the scurvy at bay.
So he looks down on the Inuit for being savages, but he's forced to emulate them just to stay alive.
That is the great irony of this entire era. Kane actually establishes a formal treaty with the Eta Eskimos. It's a non-aggression pact. The Inuit promise not to steal, and in exchange, the white men provide needles and knives. It's vital, but it's also incredibly exploitative. The superior white explorers only survived because of the charity and the skills of the very people they despised.
It really highlights that arrogance, doesn't it? The absolute refusal to see the indigenous people as experts in their own environment. They just viewed the Inuit as a resource to be used, like coal or wood.
Absolutely. And that arrogance is a perfect segue to our next section. Because if you think Kane had a rigid mindset, just wait until we look at the British Royal Navy and the search for Franklin.
Okay, let's unpack that. This brings us to theme 2, the Widow's Crusade. We are talking about Lady Jane Franklin.
Lady Jane is such a fascinating character. If Kane was battling rats and ice, Lady Jane was battling bureaucracy and public opinion from her drawing room in London. Publicly, she played the role of the grieving, helpless widow to perfection. She constantly referred to herself as a weak and defenseless woman.
But that was just an act.
100% theater. Behind the scenes, she was a powerhouse. A PR genius before the term PR even existed. She flatly refused to wear mourning clothes because she insisted publicly that John Franklin was still alive. She spent her entire personal fortune outfitting expeditions.
She really rallied the public.
She shamed the British Admiralty. She kept the search going long after they wanted to give up and declare him dead.
She created a myth, didn't she? The Franklin myth.
She absolutely did. She took the Franklin expedition, which was objectively a disastrous failure born of incompetence and hubris, and turned it into a noble martyrdom. She made sure that when they were finally found, they would be remembered as heroes who died for the glory of the empire, not as men who got lost and died of scurvy and starvation. She completely controlled the narrative.
So eventually the Admiralty washes its hands of the search. They say, he's dead, it's been too long, we're done. But she doesn't stop. She funds her own expedition, the Fox.
Yes, this is in 1857. The government has officially given up, so she buys a steam yacht, the Fox, and hires a very capable officer named Leopold McClintock to command it.
And the mission isn't just rescue anymore, is it? I mean, it's been 12 years since Franklin left.
Right. By this point, the hope of finding anyone alive is, mathematically zero, though Lady Franklin would never admit that publicly. The mission now is for answers. She wants the records. She wants to know how her husband died. She wants to secure his legacy.
And McClintock is a very capable officer. He uses sledging techniques much better than his predecessors.
He does. But let's clarify sledging. When we say sledging today, we immediately think of dog sleds. Is he using dogs?
That's a great point. What was the British method?
He uses dogs a little bit, mostly for support, but the British reliance is still overwhelmingly on man-hauling. This is a crucial distinction. They literally harnessed their own British sailors to these incredibly heavy sledges and had them drag thousands of pounds of gear across the ice.
Why?
They viewed it as more noble than using dogs. It was about suffering for the cause. It was about doing it the hard way to show British grit and determination.
That just sounds exhausting thinking about it.
It absolutely destroys the men. It burns through their calories and their morale. But McClintock and his lieutenant, William Hobson, push on. They finally reach King William Island. This is the place where Inuit oral history had long said the Franklin expedition came to grief, and they find a trail of death.
Describe what they find.
They find a ship's boat, a heavy lifeboat mounted on a sledge. And inside the boat, there are 2 skeletons.
And this is where it gets really, really baffling. Tell us about the cargo in that boat. These men were dragging this sledge. They were dying of starvation and exhaustion. They were man-hauling this massive boat across uneven sea ice. What were they carrying inside it?
This is the detail that, for me, just sums up the whole tragedy. They were hauling heavy silver plate-ornate forks and spoons with the officers' family crests on them. They had curtain rods.
Curtain rods.
Curtain rods. They had several religious books, and they had button polishers.
Button polishers.
Yes. Tools specifically designed to polish their brass uniform buttons.
Why? I mean,
Like I said.
why would you drag heavy silver and button polishers across the Arctic ice when you're literally dying of starvation?
It goes right back to that rigid Royal Navy mindset. They were carrying the burden of civilization with them until it literally crushed them. To abandon the silver plate would be to admit that the structure of the Navy, the hierarchy, the very civilization they represented, had broken down.
They refused to go native.
They refused to hunt. They refused to travel light. They clung to their identity as British naval officers, even as it was killing them.
It's both tragic and infuriating at the same time. They chose to die as British officers rather than just live as human beings.
Exactly. And nearby, at a place called Victory Point, they find the holy grail of the search, the one and only written record ever found from the Franklin expedition, the Victory Point Note.
So describe this note for us. It's not a diary, is it?
No, it's a standard Admiralty form. It's printed in 6 languages, and it's meant to be put in a bottle and thrown overboard to track ocean currents. But this one was found in a cairn, the stack of rocks, and it has 2 distinct messages on it, written a year apart.
What does the first part say?
The first message is dated May 1847. It's written in this neat, confident hand. It says essentially, all well. It gives their position. It says Sir John Franklin is commanding. Everything seems fine. They are beset by ice, but they clearly expect to get out.
And the second part?
The second part is a year later. It's scrawled in the margins, almost writing over the first part. It's dated April 1848, and it is a total devastating reversal.
What does it say?
It says that Sir John Franklin died on June 11th, 1847, just a few weeks after that all well note was written. It says 9 officers and 15 men are also dead. It says the ships, Erebus and Terror, have been deserted, trapped in the ice since 1846. And it says the 105 survivors are marching south toward the Great Fish River.
That was a death march.
A complete death march. None of them made it. But finding this note was huge. It confirmed that Franklin died before the ships were abandoned.
Which is so important for Lady Franklin's narrative, right?
Absolutely crucial. It meant Franklin died while the expedition was still technically successful, or at least functioning. He didn't see the final desperate disaster. He died a hero in command. This discovery cemented the Franklin myth. In Victorian England, they spun this as them dying gloriously.
Better to die gloriously with your silver plate than survive by living like the Inuit.
Precisely. It was a moral victory in their eyes, even if it was a complete practical failure. Lady Franklin got her statue of her husband in Waterloo Place. She got his legacy sanitized and secured.
So the mystery of the Northwest Passage in Franklin is largely solved by McClintock. But the Arctic obsession doesn't end there. It shifts.
It shifts north. It shifts to the North Pole. And this brings a completely new player into the game. A very, very different kind of explorer.
And this is theme 3, Murder on the Ice. Let's talk about Charles Francis Hall.
Hall is just an incredible character. He wasn't a naval officer. He wasn't a scientist. He certainly wasn't an aristocrat. He was a printer from Cincinnati, Ohio. He had very little formal education. But he became absolutely obsessed with the Arctic.
He believed Franklin's men were still alive, didn't he? Decades later.
He did. He was a bit of a mystic. He believed he had a divine call to go north. He was convinced that God had chosen him to find the last survivors who he believed were living with the Inuit.
And his methodology was completely different from the British.
Oh, night and day. The British tried to impose their environment on the Arctic, bringing the silver, the hierarchy, their food. Hall did the opposite. He immersed himself in the Arctic. He lived with the Inuit. He ate their food blubber, raw meat, whatever they ate. He learned their language. He didn't bring a massive crew. He traveled light.
And he had two very important companions.
Joe and Hannah. Their Inuit names were Ibirbing and Tukulito, and they are the great unsung heroes of American Arctic exploration. They guided Hall. They fed him. They literally kept him alive for years.
And these two had an incredible backstory, too, right? They weren't just isolated in the Arctic their whole lives.
Not at all. They had been taken to England by a previous explorer. They were displayed as sort of curiosities. They actually dined with Queen Victoria, so they knew civilization. They spoke English, but they chose to return to the Arctic. They became the perfect bridge between Hall's world and the world he was trying to understand.
Hall spends years looking for Franklin survivors. He doesn't find them, of course, but he finds something else that proves a very, very important point about indigenous knowledge.
This is the Frobisher relic story, and it's so important. The Inuit told Hall these oral histories about white men coming in big ships many sleeps ago. They described exactly where they camped and what they left behind. Hall followed their directions, and he found physical relics, iron, bits of brick, coal from Martin Frobisher's expedition.
And Frobisher was there in the 1500s.
300 years prior. The Inuit oral history was accurate over 3 centuries. Hall proved that you could trust these native accounts, something the British Admiralty consistently refused to do. They always dismissed Inuit testimony as fables or lies. Hall proved it was historical record.
So Hall gains a lot of credibility from this. He manages to talk the U.S. government into funding a massive expedition in 1871. The ship is the Polaris, and the goal is now the North Pole.
And this is where it all goes wrong. Hall is a brilliant solo traveler, a great ethnographer, but he's not a great ship commander. He has no idea how to manage a large, diverse crew. And the crew he gets is, for lack of a better term, the crew from hell.
Who are the main antagonists in this drama?
First, you have the sailing master, Captain Buddington. He's an old whaling captain. He's experienced, but he's also a cynic. He's a raging alcoholic, and he has zero interest in scientific discovery or getting to the pole. He just wants to hunt whales and go home. Then you have Dr. Emil Bessels.
The chief scientist.
Yes, a German scientist. And he is haughty, he's highly educated, and he absolutely despises Hall. He looks down on him as this uneducated printer who has no business leading a major scientific expedition. He openly ignores Hall's orders. He mocks him. It's an unbelievably toxic work environment on a ship that's about to be trapped in the ice.
So the Polaris sails north. They get to a very high latitude off the coast of northern Greenland, further north than any ship had ever been. Hall is ecstatic. He wants to push further. Buddington wants to stop. Bessels hates everyone. The tension is just palpable.
And then the incident. Hall returns from a 2-week sledging trip. He's cold and tired. He enters the warm cabin. He asks for a cup of coffee. He drinks it and almost immediately falls violently ill.
What were the symptoms?
A terrible burning in his stomach, violent vomiting, delirium. It hits him incredibly hard and fast.
And what does Hall say during this?
In his delirium, he starts accusing Dr. Bessels of poisoning him. He's screaming that he's being murdered. He yells that Dr. Bessels has poisoned me.
Does he recover?
He rallies for a bit, and he becomes paranoid. Rightfully so, it seems. He refuses to take any food or medicine from Bessels. He will only eat food that is prepared by Hannah, the Inuit woman. And interestingly, when he stops taking Bessels' medicine and only eats Hannah's food, he starts to get better.
That is extremely suspicious.
It is. But then, after about a week, he feels safe enough to accept a cup of coffee from the ship's mess again. He relapses immediately, goes into a coma, and dies within 2 days.
At the time, the official verdict was apoplexy or a stroke. The Navy inquiry basically swept it under the rug. But we know more now, don't we?
We do. And this is an amazing piece of historical detective work. Years later, in the 1960s, a biographer named Chauncey Loomis actually got permission to go to Greenland and exhume Hall's body from the permafrost.
And the body was preserved.
Perfectly preserved. They did an autopsy. The analysis of his hair and fingernails proved he had ingested massive amounts of arsenic in the last 2 weeks of his life.
Arsenic?
Yes. Now, arsenic was in the medical kits back then. It was used for various ailments in tiny, tiny doses. So it's possible he self-medicated accidentally, but given the timing, his accusations, the rivalry with Bessels, most modern historians believe it was murder. Bessels had the means, the motive, and the opportunity.
So the leader is dead. The ship is effectively leaderless. Buddington is drinking. Bessels is arrogant. What happens to the expedition?
Total chaos. The ship gets beset by ice that winter. During a massive storm, the ship is being squeezed and crushed. They think it's going to sink, so some of the crew and a lot of supplies are frantically unloaded onto a large ice floe next to the ship. Then the ship breaks away in the storm.
Leaving the people on the ice just stranded.
Exactly. 19 people are left drifting on an ice floe in the middle of the dark Arctic winter. This includes a man named George Tyson, who was the navigator, plus Joe, Hannah, and their children.
And the ship, the Polaris, what did they do?
Buddington, who was still on the ship, essentially abandons them. He sees them on the ice floe, but when the ice opens up, he sails the Polaris away. He just leaves these 19 souls to drift and die.
This is the famous Great Drift. How long were they on that piece of ice?
For 6 months. They drifted over 1,500 miles south from the high Arctic all the way down to the coast of Labrador.
How did they possibly survive 19 people on a shrinking block of ice for 6 months through an Arctic winter?
It comes down to 2 men, Joe and Hans. Hans Hendrik was another Inuit guide with them. The white sailors panicked. They started stealing food from the communal stores. They were useless hunters. They basically huddled in the snow huts, trembling and arguing. But Joe and Hans went out and hunted seals day after day after day.
So once again, the superior white explorers are kept alive solely by the skills and fortitude of the Inuit they treated as subordinates.
Without Joe and Hans, every single one of them would have died within weeks. It's not even a question. The Inuit fed them, they sheltered them, and they kept them alive.
And they were rescued.
Miraculously, yes. They were finally picked up by a sealing ship off the coast of Labrador. And here's the most amazing part. Not a single life was lost among the drift party. It is one of the greatest survival stories in all of human history.
It's just incredible. We've covered so much ground here. I mean, we've gone from Kane's rat-infested ship to the tragic relics of Franklin to a full-blown murder mystery on the Polaris.
It really shows this evolution of Arctic exploration, doesn't it? It started as a commercial search for a trade route. Then it became this sentimental national crusade for a lost hero. And finally, it became a quest for national glory, the race for the pole itself.
And the contrast in methods is just so stark. You have the British naval method, rigid, heavy, hauling civilization, and silver plates across the ice.
Versus the emerging American, or maybe better, pragmatic method, which is exemplified by Hall, living off the land, using dogs, actually listening to the natives.
And yet, the tragedy is that Franklin's men died hauling silver, while Hall proved you could survive for years, only to be murdered by his own crew.
It's a profound and tragic irony. It's the Arctic virus, as Burton calls it in the source, this obsession that just draws men back to the ice again and again, despite the suffering. They go looking for glory and find only their own limitations, their own hubris.
And we can't forget the women in these stories. Lady Franklin, orchestrating history and myth-making from her parlor in London. And then you have Hannah Tukulito, actually keeping 19 people alive on an ice floe.
They are the backbone of these stories, so often overshadowed by the men who get the statues and the headlines. Without Lady Franklin, the maps of that region would be blank. Without Hannah, George Tyson, and all the others would just be frozen corpses at the bottom of the ocean.
So what's the so what here? Why do these stories from 150 years ago still matter today?
Because these stories defined how the Western world saw the poles for a century. They aren't just adventure tales. They are our foundational myths of polar exploration. And they tell us so much about human nature under extreme pressure. They tell us about the dangers of arrogance and the incredible value of adaptability. The Arctic is an accelerator for character. It reveals who you truly are. Are you the guy hauling the silver plate, or are you the guy learning to build an igloo?
The mystery of the passage was solved, but the Grail, the North Pole, remains unclaimed in our timeline so far. The British failed, the Americans stumbled and literally turned on each other.
That's right. And next time, we're going to see new players enter the game, including a stoic Norwegian named Fridtjof Nansen, who decides to do something completely brilliantly crazy, drift across the pole on purpose.
I cannot wait for that. And just a reminder for everyone listening, this deep dive covered specifically chapters 7, 8, and 9 of Pierre Berton's The Arctic Grail. We will continue the analysis in the next part.
There's plenty more ice to break.
Thanks for listening. Stay warm.
And maybe leave the button polishers at home. Okay, so I want you to imagine for a second a map of the world from, say, the 1870s. You see all these intricate coastlines, you see the continents mapped out, but then your eye drifts upward, up to the very top of the globe.
And what do you see?
A giant white blank space. A void. For centuries, that void was, a place of romance. It was about finding the Northwest Passage, about brave naval officers looking for a shortcut to China.
The gentleman explorer era, right?
Exactly. But today, we are leaving that era behind. We're diving into the moment the Arctic stops being a romantic puzzle and, frankly, it becomes a horror story.
A full-on gothic horror story in some cases.
We are going deep into Pierre Berton's incredible book, The Arctic Grail, and we're focusing on this really specific dark trilogy of chapters, 10, 11, and 12. This is a big transition from about 1875 to the turn of the century.
And the tone it shifts completely. We're not talking about charting coastlines anymore. We're talking about the absolute biological and psychological limits of the human body.
We're talking scurvy, starvation, madness, even execution.
It's a grim sequence of expeditions we're covering. We start with the British, with the Nares expedition, which is really the last gasp of the old Royal Navy way of doing things.
Then we move to the Americans and the Greely expedition, which is, I mean, it's no exaggeration to say it's one of the most harrowing survival tales ever recorded.
And then, out of all that failure and death, you get this new breed emerging, the obsessives. Nansen, André, and the man who would define the final race, Robert Peary.
And what really gets me about this whole period is the sheer institutional arrogance. We're going to see how the world's greatest naval power, the British Empire, and this rising industrial giant, the United States, just kept failing.
Over and over again.
Failing in a land where indigenous people had been thriving for thousands of years. It wasn't just bad weather or bad luck. It was like a fundamentally bad philosophy.
And that's the core of it today, isn't it? It's systemic failure versus individual adaptability. Why did men die dragging sledges by hand in a land full of dogs? Why did they starve to death surrounded by game?
Let's set the stage then. It's 1875. The British Admiralty in London is they're getting antsy. The big Franklin search is over. That drama has faded.
But now they have a new problem. The Americans.
The Americans.
Yeah.
Upstarts like Elisha Kent Kane and Charles Francis Hall are all over the papers. They're pushing farther north. They're grabbing the records.
But for the Royal Navy, that just wasn't on. The Arctic was, in their minds, British territory. They'd paid for it in lives and ships for generations.
So they felt they had to reassert dominance. They needed a big public win.
Which leads to the Arctic expedition of 1875, led by Captain George Nares. And this thing was a behemoth. 2 huge steam-powered ships, the Alert and the Discovery, all the best gear money could buy.
But this is where we hit that first and maybe most critical mistake, the core of their philosophy, their method of travel.
The fatal flaw. The British had this almost religious devotion to something they called man-hauling.
It sounds brutal just saying it.
It was. They actively refused to use dogs. They thought dog sledding was, they thought it was for natives. It was undisciplined, chaotic, un-British,
It's so bizarre. They saw harnessing men to these massive sledges like they were draft animals as a sign of what, moral fiber?
Moral fiber, British grit, character building, all of it. But the physics of it were just insane. I was looking at the notes on Commander Albert Markham's sledging party.
Yeah, this part is staggering.
Because they didn't have the right gear, their sleeping bags, their tents, everything got soaked with sweat and condensation during the day. And then at night,
it froze solid.
It froze into a block of ice. So a canvas tent that should weigh, say, 30 pounds suddenly weighs 100. A sleeping bag goes from 10 pounds to 50. The final calculation was that each man was dragging 216 pounds.
216 pounds per man.
Yeah. Just try to picture that. Strap an enormous man to your waist and try to drag him through a field of boulders covered in waist-deep snow for 10 or 12 hours a day.
It's a recipe for total physical collapse. But that's only half of the death equation, isn't it? It's what they were putting into their bodies, the fuel.
The diet.
We have to talk about scurvy and the lime juice myth, because I think most people assume, hey, it's 1875, the British Navy figured scurvy out 100 years ago with Captain Cook.
You would think. You would absolutely think so. But this is just a classic story of institutional memory loss and, frankly, economics.
How so?
Well, back in Cook's day, they used lemon juice, specifically Mediterranean lemons, packed with vitamin C. But by the mid-19th century, the British Empire had these huge lime plantations in the West Indies.
So they wanted to buy from within the empire.
Exactly, support the colonies. So the entire Royal Navy switches from lemons to limes. The problem is limes have about half the vitamin C content of lemons.
Okay, so that's already a big downgrade.
But then it gets so much worse. To preserve the juice for these long voyages, they would boil it. And they would run it through copper pipes.
Which does what to the vitamin C?
It absolutely annihilates it. So what you're left with is basically useless. These men are performing this Herculean physical labor, and their only defense against scurvy is, for all intents and purposes, flavored water.
And their main diet is salt beef and hardtack biscuit.
All while they're walking past herds of muskox, they're seeing seals. But fresh meat wasn't on the Admiralty-approved ration list, so they ignored it.
The result is just. It's a slow-motion catastrophe. Bertneau's description of Lieutenant Louis Beaumont's party. It's pure nightmare fuel. Weeks out from the ship, and the men start to feel stiff. Then their gums begin to swell.
Scurvy is just a terrifying disease. It's your body literally deconstructing itself. The collagen that holds you together just dissolves. Old scars from when you were a kid can split open again.
And the gums. The book describes them swelling into these black, pulpy masses that covered their teeth, couldn't even chew the hard discs anymore.
And Beaumont, driven by that sense of duty, just keeps them marching. They're falling in the harnesses, begging to be left on the ice to die, and he forces them onto the sledges.
Which means the few men still on their feet have to pull even more weight.
It's a death spiral. It just gets faster and faster. By the time that party stumbles back to the ships, the Alert and the Discovery aren't exploration vessels anymore. They're floating hospitals.
The numbers are just. Out of 53 men on the SAG ship Alert, only 9 were fit for duty. 9.
The entire expedition was crippled. So Nares does something pretty radical for a British naval officer. He disobeys the spirit of his orders. He looks at his dying men at the ice and he says, "We're going home. A full year early."
He saved the rest of his crew. But what was the reaction back in London? Was it relief? Gratitude?
Oh, no. It was embarrassment and anger. The Admiralty could not accept that their system was the problem, that man-hauling and lime juice were failures.
So they blamed the victims.
They blamed the victims. The official inquiry concluded that the men were just soft, that their constitutions were weak. They completely ignored the fact that American expeditions who were using Inuit methods and eating fresh meat were not getting scurvy.
And that's the perfect transition. The British Navy basically proves their own methods are obsolete and they limp off stage. And who steps into the void?
The Americans. But this time, it's not the Navy. It's the U.S. Army.
Specifically, the Signal Corps, which is an interesting choice.
A very strange choice. This is the Lady Franklin Bay expedition of 1881. And the mission is different now. The justification has shifted from, glory and exploration to science.
Right. This was part of the very first international polar year. So the goal was to set up a scientific station way up north, collect data on weather and magnetism.
And, if they happened to beat the British record for farthest north while they were at it, well, so be it.
So who do they pick to lead this scientific mission? Lieutenant Adolphus Greely. And if you had to design a personality least suited for the immense psychological pressures of the Arctic, Greely might be it.
He's a tragic figure. He's a bureaucrat, a man of rules and regulations. He believed, I think, that you could conquer the Arctic with a well-written army manual. He was not a people person. He was not an outdoorsman.
So he sets up his base, Fort Conger, on Ellesmere Island. And on paper, it's a great setup. They have a prefabricated house, tons of coal, a library.
Physically, it's comfortable, but socially, it's a powder keg from day one.
The personnel choices were just disastrous. You've got Greely, this rigid, aloof commander who keeps his distance from the enlisted men, and then you have his second-in-command, who seems to be his polar opposite, the expedition surgeon, Dr. Octave Pavey.
Pavey is a character straight out of a novel. He's brilliant, no doubt, but he is unbelievably arrogant and temperamental. He's a civilian, and he thinks that makes him superior to this career army officer.
And he makes no secret of it.
None at all. He openly questions Greely's orders in front of the men. He undermines his authority constantly. And Greely, who doesn't have that sort of natural charismatic leadership, just responds by clamping down even harder with the rules.
You also have these two other officers, Lieutenant Kislingbury and Lieutenant Lockwood, and Greely clashes with them immediately because he thinks they're lazy, they sleep in too late.
And this leads to this incredible, bizarre incident early on. Kislingbury just gets completely fed up with Greely's micromanagement. And he resigns. He says, "I'm done. I quit. I'm taking the supply ship home."
But then comes the first little twist of fate.
Yeah. Kislingbury packs up all his gear, storms down to the beach to get on the ship, the Proteus, and he misses it.
He literally misses the boat.
The ship pulls away from the shore just as he's running down to it. Can you imagine that feeling? Standing there, watching your only ride home disappear over the horizon.
So now he's stuck there for a year.
Stuck there. And because he officially resigned, Greely refuses to give him any duties. He treats him as a guest. So Kislingbury doesn't have to work. He sleeps in, while all the other men are toiling away. The resentment is just off the charts.
It's an unbelievably toxic environment.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, despite all this infighting, they do manage one spectacular success.
A huge one. They do what Nares failed to do. They use dogs. Greely sends a party north, led by Lieutenant Lockwood and Sergeant David Brainerd.
And with an Inuit hunter named Christensen driving the dog sled, they actually do it. They push north, and they beat the British record. They plant the American flag at 83 degrees, 24 minutes north.
It's the high point of the entire expedition. They have the Grail. They have the farthest north. The U.S. Army has done what the mighty Royal Navy couldn't.
But the Arctic doesn't care about flags or records. And the entire expedition is built on this very fragile, very complicated resupply plan. A ship is supposed to come for them in the summer of 1882.
It tries. It can't get through the ice. It turns back.
So they wait another year. A ship's supposed to come in 1883.
And this is when true disaster strikes. The relief ship, the Proteus, the same one Kislingbury missed, gets caught in the ice pack. And it's not a ship like Nansen's Fram. It's crushed. It sinks.
Greely and his men up at Fort Conger, they don't know any of this. All they know is the deadline has passed and no ship has arrived.
And now Greely has a choice. A really critical choice. He is sitting in a warm, well-stocked house. There are muskoxen nearby. There's game. They could easily survive another winter at Fort Conger. It would be uncomfortable, but they'd live.
But
he has his orders, and for a man like Greely, orders were everything. His written instructions from the Army were crystal clear. If a relief ship does not arrive by this date, you must abandon Fort Conger and retreat south in small boats to a place called Cape Sabine,
where a relief party would have left supplies for them.
That was the plan. So Greely makes the fateful decision. He chooses obedience over common sense. He follows the book.
It's the ultimate soldier's trap, isn't it? He dooms his men by following his orders.
Precisely. They pack up what they can carry, they abandon the safety and warmth of Fort Conger, and they set out south in these small, open boats. It's an absolute nightmare journey. They're dragging the boats over ice floes, rowing through freezing water, getting caught in storms.
It takes them weeks and weeks. Finally, they reach the rendezvous point, Cape Sabine. They are hypothermic, exhausted, starving. And they're expecting to see a ship, or at the very least, a huge depot of food and supplies.
And what do they find?
Nothing. A cairn. A pile of rocks.
And inside that pile of rocks, a note. The note explains that the Proteus sank, that the main relief mission was a failure, and the party that left the note only managed to leave a tiny, pathetic cache of food.
A few moldy boxes of hardtack, some tea.
Not enough for 25 men to survive for a week, let alone an entire Arctic winter.
And this is it. This is the moment the story turns from a tale of exploration into pure horror. This is the start of the starvation winter at Camp Clay.
They can't even call it a camp. They built a shelter by turning one of their boats upside down and walling it in with snow and loose stones. It was more like a tomb.
And the starvation. It begins almost right away. They're rationing food down to the last ounce. But what's really chilling in this part of the book is the psychological collapse.
It starts at the top. Dr. Pavey, the surgeon, starts his plotting again. He goes to some of the other men and tries to start a mutiny. He wants them to declare Greely insane so he can take command.
But this is where we meet the real hero of this story, Sergeant David Brainerd.
Brainerd is the one person who seems to keep his head through all of this. Pavey approaches him, trying to get him on side for the mutiny, and Brainerd just flat out refuses. He stays loyal to Greely, and that loyalty probably prevents a total collapse of command right then and there.
So what were they eating? After the few biscuits ran out, what did they turn to?
Well, Brainerd basically saved them for a time. He would spend hours every single day in 40 below temperatures, lying over a crack in the sea ice. And he had this little net he'd made.
And he was catching what?
These tiny little crustaceans, amphipods. They called them shrimps, but they were about the size of a grain of rice.
So he's trying to feed 25 grown men on sea lice.
Essentially, yes. It was a handful a day per man. It was enough to keep them alive, but only just. And when the shrimp weren't enough, they started eating their gear.
This is the sealskin jelly.
Sealskin jelly. They would take their sealskin boots, their sleeping bags, any scraps of hide they had. They'd burn the hair off, scrape it clean, and boil it for hours and hours.
Until it turned into what?
A kind of foul-smelling, rubbery glue. It had virtually no nutritional value, but it was something warm to put in their stomachs. It filled the void for an hour or two.
And that kind of environment, the body just gives up. And the story that illustrates that better than any other is that of Corporal Ellison.
Oh, man. Ellison's story is it's the absolute depths of human suffering. Early in the winter, he's sent out to try and retrieve a small meat cache that had been left far away. He gets lost in a storm. His hands and feet freeze solid.
Solid blocks of ice.
When they finally get him back to the hut, the tissue is dead. Gangrene sets in immediately. And you have to remember, this is a tiny, cramped stone hut with 25 men inside. The smell of his rotting flesh would have been inescapable.
Overpower.
And then his hands and feet literally just sloughed off. They fell off his body. He was left with these raw stumps. He couldn't move. He couldn't feed himself. He would beg the other men to just take him outside and leave him on the ice to die.
But they didn't. And this is the strange, almost unbelievable part of Greely's command.
It's this incredible paradox. Greely insists that Ellison, the most helpless man, must be cared for. They actually give him extra rations. The other men, who are starving and able-bodied, give up a portion of their tiny shrimp ration to keep this dying man alive. It's this grim, heartbreaking act of military duty and nobility.
But that nobility didn't extend to everyone. There was a villain in their midst, Private Charles Henry.
Yeah, Henry was bad news from the get-go. Turns out he'd enlisted under a false name. He was a known criminal. He was also one of the physically strongest men left. And he started stealing food.
Which, in this context, isn't just theft. It's attempted murder.
It is murder. Every shrimp he stole was literally taking minutes off another man's life. Greely warned him. He caught him again. He warned him again. But Henry knew the others were too weak to physically starve him. He just kept doing it.
So Greely realizes that this one man is going to get them all killed?
He does. And he makes the coldest, most difficult decision of his life. He sits down and writes a formal military order.
I remember reading the text of it. It's so chilling because of how procedural it is. It's addressed to the three sergeants, Brainerd, Long, and Frederick.
And it states, basically, that Private Henry is a threat to the survival of the command, and it gives them a direct order. The next time you catch him stealing food, you are to execute him.
And they do.
They do. They catch him red-handed, stealing the last of the shrimp. They confront him, he apparently lunges at them, and they shoot him. 2 bullets. They couldn't bury him in the frozen ground, so they just dragged his body to a crack in the ice and pushed it in. The first and only military execution in the high Arctic.
As spring of 1884 arrives, the deaths start coming faster. Men are just fading away. The record holder, Lockwood, dies. Kislingbury, the officer who missed the boat, he dies. The 2 Inuit hunters die. And then we come to the darkest secret of the expedition, the thing that wasn't discovered until later.
The C word, cannibalism.
It's the ultimate taboo, but Berton is very clear that the evidence found by the rescue party was undeniable.
It was. When the bodies were recovered and examined, they found that flesh had been systematically removed from the limbs of several of the dead. But it wasn't torn away like a desperate, starving man might do.
No, the book uses the phrase skillfully dissected.
Which points the finger in one direction.
Dr. Pavey.
Dr. Pavey, the surgeon. Pavey himself died before the rescue, but the overwhelming theory is that he, as the medical officer, took it upon himself to harvest the muscle tissue from the dead to add to the communal stew pot.
So it's possible the survivors didn't even know what they were eating.
It's entirely possible. Pavey may have seen it not as a moral horror, but as a cold, logical medical procedure. We require protein to live. This is protein. Therefore, we will consume it. It's beyond grim.
And so finally, we get to June of 1884, the absolute 11th hour. A new, much more powerful relief expedition led by Commander Schley and the ships Bear and Thetis finally manages to smash through the ice to Cape Sabine.
They send a small boat to shore. They can't see anyone. They find the collapsed tent.
The tent had been blown down in a storm, and the men inside were too weak to even lift the canvas off themselves. They were just lying there, trapped in the dark.
One of the rescuers, a man named Colwell, pulls out a knife and just slashes the tent canvas open.
And the first thing that hits him is the smell.
The smell of death and filth and decay. He peers into the darkness and he sees a figure, a man who looks like a skeleton with a long, wild beard and a dirty skull cap on. The man slowly puts on a pair of spectacles. It's Greely.
He's too weak to stand. He's barely able to speak. He looks up at his rescuer and whispers,
7 of us left. Here we are, dying like men.
And then, in this moment that just perfectly captures the obsessive madness of this entire era, Greely grabs Colwell's arm. And he asks his first question, not, do you have food? Not, how is my family?
He asks, did we hold the record for farthest north?
He's literally a ghost lying among corpses, and the first thing on his mind is whether he beat the British.
The Grail. It was always about the Grail.
And he had. They held the record. But the price was 18 dead men, and the horror wasn't even over. When they get the survivors back to America, at first they're celebrated as heroes. But then, the cannibalism story breaks.
The New York Times gets the scoop. And the public turns on them instantly. They go from heroes to ghouls overnight. Greely spent the rest of his long life trying to restore his and his men's reputations.
We've seen the British fail because of tradition and arrogance. We've seen the Americans fail because of rigid discipline and flawed logistics. It really seemed like these huge military-style expeditions were a complete dead end.
A total dead end. The Arctic had proven that you couldn't conquer it with brute force, so a new generation started to look at the problem in a completely different way.
This is the big pivot in Chapter 12, the arrival of the new breed. These guys aren't naval captains or army lieutenants. They're scientists, adventurers, individuals.
And the first, and perhaps most brilliant, is the Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen. If Greely is the great tragedy, Nansen is the great triumph of pure intellect.
He wasn't even an explorer originally. He was a neuroscientist.
A brain scientist. And he approaches the problem like a scientist. He reads about the wreckage of a ship called the Jeannette, which was crushed in the ice north of Siberia. And a few years later, pieces of that wreckage wash up on the coast of Greenland.
On the other side of the Arctic.
On the complete opposite side. And Nansen has this light bulb moment. He realizes the ice isn't a static barrier, it's a current. A giant, slow-moving conveyor belt.
So his idea is, don't try to smash through the wall.
Get on the conveyor belt and ride it. His idea was to deliberately build a ship that was designed to get frozen into the ice.
Which led to the Fram, one of the most famous ships in history. And it looked weird, didn't it? It wasn't sleek.
It was the opposite of sleek. It was shaped like a watermelon seed. The hull was rounded and smooth. The theory was when the ice pack squeezed it, and we're talking about pressure that can snap a steel hull like a twig, the Fram wouldn't be crushed. The pressure would just pop it up, and it would sit safely on top of the ice.
And it worked.
It worked perfectly. He and his crew drifted across the top of the world for 3 years. It proved the Arctic was a deep ocean, not a continent. It proved that you could survive by being smart, not just by being tough.
Intelligence over force.
Yeah.
But intelligence can also become hubris. Which brings us to the next innovator, the Swede, S.A. André.
Ah, yes. If Nansen's approach was work with nature, André's was conquer nature with technology.
He looked at the problem and said, basically, walking is too slow, drifting is too boring, I'll just fly over it.
In a hydrogen balloon. In 1897. It sounds like something out of a Jules Verne novel. Greely, who was an old man by then, actually met André before his flight and told him it was a terrible idea. He said, "You don't understand the weather up there. It's suicide."
But André had that incredible Victorian faith in machinery. He was sure it would work. He launches his balloon, the Eagle, from an island in the Svalbard archipelago, and the disaster starts almost immediately.
It's just heartbreaking. They had these long, heavy ropes called guide ropes hanging from the basket. The idea was that they would drag along the ice and act as a sort of rudder, allowing them to steer.
A brilliant idea, in theory.
In theory. But as the balloon lifted off, the ropes twisted and the attachments unscrewed themselves, and the guide ropes just fell off and dropped to the ground.
So within minutes of taking off, he's lost all steering.
He's just a passenger. A bubble at the mercy of the wind. And then the fog rolls in. The moisture in the air freezes onto the silk of the balloon, coating it in a layer of ice.
Adding hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weight.
Exactly. The balloon is forced down. It crashes onto the ice pack after only 3 days in the air.
And then, just silence for more than 30 years.
It became one of the great mysteries of the age. No one knew what happened to them. It wasn't until 1930 that some Norwegian sealers stumbled upon their last campsite on a remote island. They found their bodies, their diaries, and even their undeveloped camera film.
And the really tragic part is, they didn't die in the crash.
Not at all. They survived the crash and then began this heroic, month-long trek south across the moving ice pack. They almost made it to safety.
So what got them in the end?
The current thinking is trichinosis. They were hunting and eating polar bears to survive, but they probably didn't cook the meat well enough. They got infected with the parasite. So in the end, the new technology failed them, and then basic biology killed them.
Which brings us to the last major figure in this section. The man who looked at all these failures, the British, the Americans, the Swedes, and took notes. The man who created a ruthless new system, Robert Peary.
Peary is the culmination of everything that came before. He is a different animal entirely. He's not really exploring for science like Nansen or for national glory like Nares. For Peary, the North Pole is personal. It's his property. He calls it the aim.
And his method is brutally simple. He decided, I'm just going to copy the people who actually live here.
That's it. The Peary method was essentially the Inuit method. He wore furs, not British wool. He lived in igloos, not canvas tents. He ate fresh meat. And most importantly, he used dogs, and he learned how to drive them from the masters.
But there was a coldness to him, right? A kind of inhuman single-mindedness. The story about his toes says it all.
It really does. It's a defining anecdote. On one of his many attempts, he gets severe frostbite in his feet. He gets back to his base, takes off his sealskin boots, and 8 of his toes are black, frozen solid, dead tissue.
No doctor, no surgeon around?
No. So Peary just sits down, takes a pair of pliers, or maybe just his bare hands, the story varies, and he just snaps them off, one by one, at the joint.
He just breaks his own toes off.
Breaks them off. And his reaction in his diary isn't horror or agony, it's just a cold calculation. He wrote, "A few toes aren't much to give to get the pole."
And that's the new breed, isn't it? Greeley was broken by the suffering of his men. Peary was willing to literally dismantle his own body piece by piece to keep going.
That's the brutal lesson of this era. The Arctic Grail demands a price. To get it, you had to shed your cultural arrogance, like the British. You had to shed your rigid adherence to rules, like Greeley. And in Peary's case, you had to be willing to shed parts of your own body and maybe even a piece of your humanity.
So we've come a long way. From the scurvy-ridden decks of the Royal Navy to the frozen tomb at Cape Sabine, and now to the dawn of this obsessive, ruthless race for the pole itself. The blank space on the map is still there, but the quest to fill it has gotten a lot bloodier.
The price went up, and as we're about to see, the final payments were still due.
Absolutely. This deep dive has brought us right to the threshold of the final and frankly ugliest chapter in this story. The race is about to become a bitter personal fight. In our next part, we will be analyzing the final chapters of Berton's book, The Toxic, Hateful Feud between Robert Peary and Dr. Frederick Cook, over who really got to the pole first.
It gets really messy.
And we'll also look at the man who finally, quietly, conquered the other great Arctic prize, the Northwest Passage, Roald Amundsen. So there's a lot more to come.
A lot more.
For now, thank you for joining us on this part of the journey, learner. It's been a heavy one.
It has. Maybe. Go eat an orange or something after this.
That is excellent advice. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to a place that, for centuries, didn't really exist on a map.
Right.
It was a blank space.
Yeah.
A theoretical point.
Mm-hmm.
But for the men we're talking about today, it wasn't just a coordinate. It was an obsession. A sickness, really.
It was the final prize. That's what they called it. The North Pole.
The North Pole. And we are not talking about the festive reindeer-filled version. We are talking about the Great Ice. A shifting, crushing, freezing ocean that just, wow, wants to kill you.
And it very often did. I mean, the history of the Arctic is littered with bodies.
To guide us through this absolute nightmare of a journey, we are looking at the culmination of Pierre Berton's massive history, the Arctic Grail. We're focusing exclusively on the endgame chapter 13 and the postscript. This is the period from 1905 to 1909. The race is on. And the gloves are off.
And the masks come off, too. That's what makes this specific chapter of history so compelling. For almost 100 years, you had the British Navy throwing ships and men at the Arctic in these, very formal, stiff upper lip expeditions.
Right.
But by the time we get to 1905, the British have mostly tapped out. The quest for the pole has become an American obsession, and it boils down to 2 men.
2 men who hate each other.
Loathe is probably a better word. It was a deep personal animosity.
We have Robert E. Peary and Dr. Frederick Cook. And you really couldn't write 2 characters who are more diametrically opposed, could you?
It's almost too perfect for fiction. It's unbelievable. On one side, you have Peary.
He's establishment guy.
Totally the establishment. He's a civil engineer in the U.S. Navy. He is rigid. He's grim. He's incredibly arrogant. He treats the Arctic like a war zone.
Yeah, he doesn't love it.
No, he wants to conquer it. He wants to beat it into submission. He's the kind of guy who refers to himself in the third person, just not a pleasant person.
A real barrel of laughs.
Oh, absolutely. And then on the other side, you have Dr. Frederick Cook. And Cook is, well, he's everything Peary isn't.
Right.
He's a medical doctor. He's soft-spoken. He's charming. People liked him. He has this terrible track record of bad luck with money. But people genuinely loved being around him.
And Amundsen.
Roald Amundsen, yeah. The guy who eventually conquered the South Pole, he sailed with Cook years earlier. And Amundsen said Cook was the most kind, capable, and psychologically steady man he ever met.
So we have the grim professional soldier versus the plucky, charming amateur.
Exactly. But Our mission today isn't just to rehash the who got there first debate, because frankly, that's kind of the least interesting part.
Right.
We want to understand the psychology here. We want to look at what happens to the human mind when you push it to the absolute brink of starvation and isolation. And we want to see how history gets written and, more importantly, erased.
Because when you're standing at 90 degrees north, there are no witnesses.
None.
Yeah.
Just you and the ice.
So let's start with Peary. Because by 1905, this guy's been trying to get to the pole for decades. He's not a young man anymore.
No, he's approaching 50. In the Victorian era, that's an old man for this kind of work.
And physically, he's a wreck.
A total wreck. He's already lost most of his toes to frostbite on previous trips, 8 of them. He literally shuffles when he walks.
Wait, he has no toes?
Just the pinky toes,
Yeah.
essentially. He kept them in a jar.
Of course he did. Okay, that sets the tone right there. So in 1905, he launches a massive expedition in a ship called the Roosevelt. And this trip is critical because it sets up a pattern of, let's call it creative geography.
Right. This is the Peary Channel incident. So Peary is exploring the northern coast of Ellesmere Island. He climbs a high peak, looks out west, and he claims he sees a massive body of water cutting the island in two.
A channel.
A huge channel. He names it the Peary Channel. He draws it on his map. He describes the cliffs, the water, everything.
He's very specific about it.
Extremely specific. He reports this to the world. I have discovered the Peary Channel.
But I sense a but coming.
But it's not there.
It's not there at all.
Not even a little bit. Years later, other explorers go there. It's solid land. It's high land, glaciers, mountains. There is no channel.
So was he lying? Or was he hallucinating? I mean, which is worse for an explorer?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? In the Arctic, there is a phenomenon called looming. It's a mirage caused by temperature inversions. It can make distant land look like water or water look like land. It's a real thing.
Okay, so it's plausible.
It's plausible, but Peary was an experienced observer. He had been in the Arctic for 20 years at this point. For him to be so certain about a major geographic feature that just flat out didn't exist, it suggests that he saw what he wanted to see.
And if he can see a giant channel that isn't there, he can probably see a mathematical point on the ice that isn't there.
Precisely. It establishes that his observations are deeply, deeply tied to his desires. It foreshadows everything.
That 1906 trip ends in failure, though. He sets a record farthest north,
Right.
at 87 degrees 6 minutes, but he doesn't hit the pole.
Right. He almost dies getting that record.
Right.
He crosses this massive stretch of open water called the Big Lead and barely makes it back.
And he writes something in his diary that is just, it's desolate. The game is off. I cannot accomplish the impossible.
He was broken. You can feel it in the writing. He really thought that was his last shot. He goes home. He's getting older. The funding is drying up.
Wow.
But obsession is a hell of a drug. He can't let it go. It's eaten him alive.
Yeah.
So he rallies for one final attempt in 1908.
This is the big one, the 1908-1909 expedition. And this is where we really need to unpack the logistics. Because people talk about the Peary system like it's this genius invention.
Yeah.
But when you look at the details in Berton's book, it's actually quite brutal. It's industrial.
It is. It's the industrialization of exploration. Peary realized that the limiting factor in polar travel is weight. It's all about weight. You need food to travel, but the food has weight. So you need dogs to pull the food. But the dogs need food.
It's the rocket equation.
It's the tyranny of the rocket equation, but with pemmican.
Exactly.
So Peary designs a pyramid structure. He brings a massive team, 24 men, 19 sleds, 133 dogs. They all start heading north from the ship together. But the first group, he calls them the Pioneer Party, their job isn't to get to the pole.
No, their job is to be the snowplows.
That's a perfect way to put it. They hack through the ice ridges with pickaxes, they build the igloos, they use up their supplies, and when their sleds are empty, they turn around and go home.
So they're disposable stages of the rocket. They just get jettisoned.
Yes, they burn out so the payload, which is Peary, can keep going.
And the fuel they are running on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the pemmican, because you see this in all the books, but it's not a granola bar.
No, God, no. Pemmican is the standard polar ration. It's dried meat, usually beef, ground into a powder, and then mixed with an enormous amount of melted fat.
Just pure fat.
Peary's specific formula was 60% fat, 40% protein. No sugar, no filler. It is a dense, greasy brick of calories. But you need that fat to keep your body temperature up when it's 50 below zero.
It sounds revolting.
It probably was until you were starving and burning 10,000 calories a day.
Yeah.
Then it probably tasted like heaven. But the system relies on this ruthlessness.
Yeah.
Imagine being one of those support men. You're freezing, you're working 14 hours a day, chopping ice, you're sleeping in wet furs. You want to see the pole, too. That's why you signed up.
Of course.
But Peary looks at you and says, you're done. Your sled is empty. Give us your best dogs. Take the sick ones. Go back.
Wow. Not even take your own dogs back. Give us the good ones.
Give us the fresh dogs, the best food you have left, and get out of here. It has to breed some serious resentment.
It creates a hierarchy where everyone exists solely to serve Peary's ambition.
Exactly. And this culminates in the most controversial decision of the entire expedition, the dismissal of Captain Bob Bartlett.
Bartlett. This guy is a legend in his own right.
He is. Captain Bob Bartlett was a Newfoundlander. Tough as nails. I mean, born on the ice, practically. He was the master of the ship, the Roosevelt. And on the ice, he was the one breaking the trail for the final leg.
He's the lead plow.
He's the lead plow, and he is a workhorse. He gets Peary to within 150 miles of the pole. They are right there. The door is open.
And Bartlett is the only other person on the team who can navigate.
Yeah.
Right. He's the only one who can use the sextant to verify their position.
Correct, and that is crucial. If you are going to claim the greatest geographic prize in history, you want a witness. You want a second opinion to say, yes, I checked the math, we are here.
So logically, you take Bartlett with you. It's a no-brainer.
Logically, yes, it's the only sane thing to do. But Peary sends him back.
Why? I mean, what possible reason could he have?
Ego, pure and simple. Peary actually admitted this later. He said he didn't want to share the glory with another white man. He wanted to be the only white man to stand at the pole.
Another white man. That phrasing is, it's important.
It's very important because he kept Matthew Henson, his African-American assistant, and 4 Inuit men Uta, Ejingwa, Siglu, and Ukia. In Peary's worldview, which was, very much of his time, they didn't count as rivals for the glory.
There were support staff.
They were assistants. They were, in his mind, racially inferior. They couldn't challenge his claim. Bartlett, however, would have been a peer. He would have shared the podium.
So he sends his auditor home. He removes the checks and balances from his own system.
Exactly. He ensures that whatever happens in that final 150 miles, there is only one version of the story. His.
And this is where the story gets murky.
It goes from murky to unbelievable.
Because as soon as Bartlett leaves, Peary's speed changes.
Drastically. It's like he's suddenly strapped on a rocket pack.
Let's do the math here, because Berton breaks this down, and the numbers are just startling. Up until Bartlett leaves, what kind of pace were they setting?
It was a slog. I mean, a real grind. They were fighting the ice drift. They were chopping through ridges constantly. They were averaging about 12 to 13 miles per day. And that's considered good time for a large party on the polar ice.
Okay. 13 miles a day. So Bartlett turns around. Peary is now alone with Henson and the Inuit. Suddenly, what happens?
Suddenly, Peary claims they start flying. For the next 5 marches, he records an average of 25 miles per day in his diary.
That's double their previous speed.
Double. Then, on the final dash, he claims they covered 130 nautical miles in just 5 days.
That's 26 nautical miles a day, which is what, almost 30 regular miles?
Yeah, it's over 30 statute miles per day. It's an insane pace.
But the return trip is even crazier, right? That's where it really goes off the rail.
The return trip is where the physics really break down. After allegedly hitting the pole, Peary claims they raced back to land. He claims they covered the entire distance back to the coast in just 16 marches.
16.
There are days where he claims they traveled 50 miles. There's one stretch where he implies they covered nearly 100 miles in just 2 days.
100 miles. Walking. On shifting sea ice.
Unpack us. And you have to remember, this isn't a highway. It's a chaos of ice flows.
Yeah.
You have pressure ridges that are like walls of ice, 10, 20, sometimes 30 feet high. You have to climb over them or hack through them. You have leads, cracks of open water that you have to detour around, sometimes for miles.
You can't just walk in a straight line.
Never. To claim 50 miles a day, it's like claiming you ran a marathon in an hour. It defies belief for anyone who's ever been on sea ice.
Yeah. And he didn't stop to do any real navigation on the way out.
That's the other thing. Navigation takes time. To use a sextant in the Arctic, you have to stop. You have to unpack the Mercury artificial horizon, which is literally a tray of mercury you use to get a level surface.
Oh.
You have to lie down on the ice at 40 below zero. You have to warm the mercury so it doesn't freeze. You have to take the sight, do the trigonometry with frozen fingers. It takes at least an hour, probably more.
And Peary claims
Peary claims he was moving so fast he barely stopped. He took one set of observations at the pole, supposedly, but none on the final dash out. He was just dead reckoning.
So he's sprinting blind over an obstacle course at world record speeds as a 52-year-old man with no toes.
Laughs. When you put it that way, it does sound a bit unlikely, doesn't it?
It sounds completely impossible. But let's go with it for a second. Let's talk about the moment of arrival, April 6, 1909. Peary claims they reached the pole. Camp Jessup. This is the moment he has dreamed of his entire life. You'd expect, I don't know, fireworks, tears, a speech.
You'd expect euphoria, some massive emotional release. But the descriptions we have from Henson are just bizarre.
What does Henson say?
He says Peary arrives. He doesn't say a word to Henson. He barely acknowledges the Inuit. He plants the flag, and then he crawls into his igloo and goes to sleep.
He takes a nap at the North Pole.
He sleeps for hours. Henson is bewildered. He tries to congratulate him, and Peary just kind of grunts. When he wakes up, he writes a diary entry. But, and this is a huge red flag for investigators later, the entry for that day is written on a loose leaf of paper.
It's not in the book.
It's not bound into his notebook like every other day of the expedition. It's a separate piece of paper tucked in.
Why does that matter?
Because if you're unsure of your position or if you're planning to fabricate something later, a loose leaf gives you options. You can write it later. You can throw it away if it turns out you were wrong. The entry itself says, "The pole at last. The prize of 3 centuries. I cannot bring myself to realize it."
Cannot bring myself to realize it. That sounds less like triumph and more like detachment?
Or
disbelief.
Or doubt. It's a very strange choice of words.
Yeah.
He takes a photo of the Inuit men holding flags. But even the shadows in the photos have been analyzed by astronomers later. And some argue the sun angle in those photos suggests they were at least 30 miles, maybe more, away from the pole. And then they turn around and sprint home on this royal road, as he called it.
A royal road.
Yes. He claims they hit every single old igloo, every trail perfectly. The ice, which is usually drifting east at a mile a day, just magically stayed still for him. Gets back to the ship, the Roosevelt. And here is the strangest part of all.
It gets stranger.
It does. He climbs aboard, he sees his crew, his doctor, Captain Bartlett, and he says nothing.
He doesn't say, "We did it, break out the champagne."
Oh, he keeps it to himself for weeks. His doctor asks him, "How did it go, Commander?" And Peary mumbles something like, "I was not altogether unsuccessful."
Not altogether unsuccessful. That is the understatement of the century.
It suggests a man who is deeply conflicted, or a man who is preparing a lie and needs to get his story straight. Or perhaps a man who knows he missed it, but can't bear to admit failure again.
The game is off. Wasn't an option this time. This was it.
Exactly.
But while Peary is sulking on his ship, keeping his secret and heading back to civilization, he gets a nasty surprise. Someone else has beaten him to the telegraph office.
Enter Dr. Frederick Cook.
The dark horse.
The ultimate dark horse. Now, we have to rewind a bit. While Peary was preparing his massive military-style expedition, Cook was doing something completely different. In 1907, he went north on what was supposed to be a hunting trip with a wealthy gambler named John Bradley.
A hunting trip, not a polar expedition.
No, they were just going to shoot some muskoxen, have a good time. But somewhere along the line, Cook gets the bug. He decides, you know what? I'm here. The pole is there. I'm going to make a run for it.
With what supplies? Peary has a custom-built ship and 130 dogs. Cook has what?
Cook has practically nothing. He takes 2 young Inuit men at Tukashik and Awela. He takes 2 sleds, maybe 26 dogs, and he just goes. It's a stealth mission. A shoestring budget.
It sounds suicidal.
It should have been. By all rights, he should have vanished. But Cook was resourceful. He was different from Peary. He adopted the Inuit way of life completely. He didn't try to conquer the Arctic. He tried to live within it. He was the survivor.
And he claims he made it.
He claims he reached the pole in April 1908, a full year before Peary.
So if true, he wins. Game over.
If true. But his evidence is even flimsier than Peary's. I mean, he has no verifiable sextant observations. He has no witnesses other than the 2 Inuit men who later gave conflicting stories and at one point said they never went out of sight of land.
So he almost certainly faked it too.
Almost certainly. But the part of Cook's story that rings absolutely true, the part that Berton really emphasizes, is the return journey. Because whether he hit the pole or not, he got horribly lost on the way back. And what happened to him is straight out of a horror movie.
This is the survival part.
It is. This is the part of the story that I think is actually the most impressive, even if the pole claim is a lie. Cook and his two companions miss their route back. The ice drifts them west into Jonestown. They are hundreds of miles off course, and winter is coming.
And this isn't just, it gets cold. This is the polar night. Months of darkness.
4 months of total darkness. They are stranded at a place called Cape Sparbow. They have no food left, no ammunition for their rifles. Their clothes are literally falling apart at the seams.
So what do? How do you even survive that?
They dig a hole, they find a cave-like depression in the ground, they build walls up with stones and muskox skulls, and they roof it with their tent and some skins, and they crawl inside. 3 men. The entire winter.
I want the listener to picture this. It's pitch black outside, 24/7. It's 50 below. You are in a stone box with 2 other guys. You have one small blubber lamp burning for heat and light. The smell must have been unimaginable.
Rancid oil, unwashed bodies, rotting meat scraps. And they were starving. They ran out of meat, so they started looking at their gear as a food source.
They ate their gear?
They took their boots, sealskin boots that they'd been walking in for a year, and the rawhide lashings from their sleds, and they boiled them.
Boiled leather.
For hours and hours, trying to soften it enough to chew. Cook described it as like eating rubber bands flavored with sweat. But it had a tiny amount of protein. That's what kept them alive.
That and the mental survival. This is the detail that just sticks with me. To stay sane, Cook wrote.
He did. He knew that if they just sat there in the dark, they would go insane. The sensory deprivation would break their minds, so he forced himself to write. He didn't have paper, so he used these tiny recipe pads. They were like promotional notepads from a meatpacking company that he happened to have in his pocket. Tiny scraps of paper. He developed a microscopic shorthand so he could fit more words on the page. And in that dark cave, he wrote a 150,000-word manuscript. He wrote about Inuit psychology, the behavior of the dogs, the sexual customs of the tribe. He became an anthropologist just to keep his brain working.
That is incredible. A fraud, maybe, but a survivor, definitely.
Absolutely. When they finally emerged in the spring of 1909 and made it back to a settlement in Greenland, they looked like monsters. They were covered in green mold from the damp cave. Their hair hung down to their waists. They had forgotten how to speak properly.
So Cook emerges from the dead. He makes it to a telegraph station. He sends a message. Reached North Pole, April 21st, 1908. The world goes crazy. He's the hero.
He is the ultimate underdog. The Americans love him. The Danes love him. He's being feted by royalty in Copenhagen. He's wearing garlands of flowers. He is on top of the world.
And then 5 days later, the other shoe drops.
A telegram from Labrador. Stars and stripes nailed to the pole. Signed, Robert E. Peary.
And the war begins.
And it was nasty. Immediately, Peary didn't just say, hey, I made it too, let's compare notes. He immediately went for the throat. He called Cook a dingy fake. He said he has simply handed the public a gold brick.
A gold brick? That's such a great 1909 insult. It means a scam, a counterfeit.
Right. But Peary's aggression completely backfired, at least at first. The public saw Peary as this grumpy, jealous establishment figure trying to crush the little guy.
Yeah.
They saw Cook as the polite, gracious hero. When reporters told Cook that Peary had also claimed the pole, Cook said, "There's glory enough for all."
Classy. Very well played.
Very classy. When reporters told Peary that Cook had made it a year earlier, Peary said, he's a liar.
You can see why the public sided with Cook. But the Peary Club, the National Geographic Society, the New York Times, his wealthy backers, they circled the wagons.
Yeah.
They had invested too much money and prestige in Peary to let him lose.
And they started digging into Cook's story. And the cracks, they started to appear very, very quickly.
The box at Etah. This is the plot device that sinks Cook, isn't it?
It's the smoking gun that wasn't there. It's the central mystery. When experts and reporters asked Cook, okay, show us your navigation logs, show us the math, Cook had an answer. He said, I don't have them with me. I left them in a box at Etah in Greenland with a hunter named Harry Whitney.
Why? Why on earth would you leave the most important documents in human history in a box with some guy named Harry?
Cook's excuse was weight. He said the sledding was too hard on the final leg to carry the notebooks, which is, of course, absurd. A few notebooks weigh nothing compared to the food you're eating every day.
It makes no sense. And Peary's ship was there, right? The Roosevelt was at Etah when Whitney was there with the box.
Yes. And this is where Peary's incredible pettiness actually served him well. Harry Whitney asked Peary for passage back to America for himself and his gear, including Cook's box. Peary said yes to Whitney, but no to the box. He refused to carry anything belonging to Cook on his ship.
Wow.
So the box stayed behind in Greenland.
And it was lost.
It was never seen again. But later, it came out that the box likely contained nothing of value anyway, maybe some old instruments, some broken glass. Cook used the lost box as a perfect excuse to explain why he couldn't prove his claim.
It was a MacGuffin. A brilliant, tragic MacGuffin.
Exactly. And then the floodgates opened. It turned out Cook had very likely faked his ascent of Mount McKinley years earlier. His guide, a man named Ed Barrow, signed an affidavit admitting they never got anywhere near the top. They just faked the summit photo on a lower peak.
Ouch.
Then, two guys in New York, Dunkel and Luce, came forward.
Dunkel and Luce. It sounds like a vaudeville act.
It really does. They were navigators for hire. They admitted that Cook had paid them to manufacture the astronomical calculations backwards from the pole to make his fictional story check out.
So he was buying the proof after the fact. He was reverse engineering his own lie.
By December 1909, Cook was finished. The University of Copenhagen revoked the honorary degree they had just given him. He was a pariah. He eventually just disappeared.
So Peary wins, by default.
Technically. But it was such a hollow victory. He spent the rest of his life testifying before Congress, trying to explain his impossible speeds and his lack of proof. He was grilled. He was humiliated. He was eventually promoted to Rear Admiral by very narrow vote. But he died a bitter defensive man.
And the verdict. Berton spends a lot of time analyzing the evidence from both sides. What is the conclusion of the Arctic Grail?
The conclusion is what some historians call the double negative. Cook definitely didn't make it. He was a fantasist, a charming con man.
Right.
But Peary. The evidence is overwhelming that he didn't make it either. His speeds were impossible. His navigation was unchecked. The most likely scenario is that he got close, maybe to Bartlett's last camp, 87 or 88 degrees north, and then realized he couldn't make the last stretch and return alive. So he camped, waited, and came back with a story.
So they both lied? One lied because he wanted to be famous. The other lied because he couldn't bear to be a failure.
That's a very fair assessment of the psychology, I think.
This brings us to the postscript of the book, and Berton calls it the chart of immortality.
This is, for me, the most moving and powerful part of the book. You look at a map of the high Arctic today. It is covered in names.
Cape Morris Jessup, Grinnell Land, Wardhun Island, Axel Heiberg Island.
These are the names of the rich white men who paid for the trips. Morris Jessup was a banker. Henry Grinnell was a shipping magnate. They didn't go to the Arctic, they just wrote checks. But their names are on the northernmost tip of land in the world, forever.
Tennyson wrote, "Nothing worth living for but to have one's name inscribed on the Arctic chart. That was the currency. Immortality on paper."
But the tragedy is, who is not on the map? The people who actually did the work. The people who saved the expeditions. The people who actually knew how to survive up there.
The indigenous people.
Yes. And Berton tells the stories of these incredible figures who are just footnotes in the explorer's own journals. Take a Kaicho.
Who was that Kaicho?
He was a Yellowknife chief. Way back in the 1820s, Sir John Franklin, the famous British explorer, was starving to death on his first land expedition. His men were eating lichen off the rocks in their own boot leather. It was a disaster.
Right.
A Kaicho and his people found them, fed them, nursed them back to health. Without a Kaicho, Franklin dies 20 years before he disappears on his famous last voyage.
Is there an Akaicho land? Or a Mount Akaicho?
Nothing. Not a single landmark.
And then there's the couple, Tukalito and Eberbing, Hannah and Joe.
Hannah and Joe, these two are legends. They traveled with the American explorer Charles Francis Hall. After Hall was murdered, they were stuck on an ice floe for 6 months with a group of mutinous sailors.
For 6 months on a piece of ice.
Drifting south. The white sailors were helpless. They basically laid in their sleeping bags waiting to die. Joe, Eberbing, hunted seals every single day to feed them. Hannah, Tukulito, chewed the skins to make them pliable for boots. She cooked the meat. She rationed the food. They kept 19 people alive through an Arctic winter on a drifting ice pan.
And yet I've never heard of them.
Exactly. And Hans Hendrik, a Greenlandic man who served 4 different expeditions, Kane, Hayes, Hall, Nares. He traveled thousands of miles. He saved lives over and over and over. But when the maps were drawn, they named the capes and the bays after the guys in the London clubs and the New York boardrooms.
And of course, Matthew Henson.
Henson's erasure is particularly painful. He was an American. He was Peary's right-hand man for 20 years. He spoke the Inuit language better than Peary. He drove the sleds better than Peary. He was arguably the first man to stand at their final camp, as he was often breaking trail ahead of Peary.
But because he was black.
He was ignored. The National Geographic Society gave Peary a gold medal. They gave medals to his wealthy backers. They gave one to Captain Bartlett. They gave Henson nothing. It took decades for him to be recognized for his role.
It really highlights that this race wasn't just about geography. It was about ego. It was about colonialism, about white supremacy. It was about ownership of the planet.
And that leads to the final beautiful irony, the Inuit perspective on all of this.
Right. Because Inuit were watching these white men go absolutely crazy over this invisible spot on the ice.
To the Inuit, the idea of the North Pole was laughable. It was a joke. Why would you want to go there? There are no seals. There are no bears. There's no life. It's a desert of moving ice.
That's a place of death.
Exactly. When Peary told them they were going to the Big Nail, that's what they called the pole, they went because he paid them in rifles and knives and supplies they needed. But they didn't care about the location. They didn't care about the map.
Berton has this great line about their view of the future, doesn't he?
Yes. It's the perfect ending. He says that for the Inuit, the future wasn't about a name on a chart that would last forever. The future was the next fat seal. It was immediate. It was about life. It was about survival. It was about community.
The white men were obsessed with immortality names on paper. The Inuit were focused on reality food on the table.
And in the end, the map is just paper. The ice melts. The names drift away. The obsession ruined Cook's life. It embittered Peary's. It cost countless lives, killed perfectly good dogs. And for what?
A mathematical abstraction.
A ghost, a point that only exists in your mind.
It really makes you question the whole heroic age of exploration. We celebrate the planting of the flag, but we rarely look at the cost or the lies or the people who were stepped on to get there.
I think that's the ultimate value of Berton's book. It's not a hagiography. It strips away the romance. It shows you the frozen toes, the boiled leather, the petty jealousies, the lies. It humanizes them, but it also knocks them off the pedestal.
So, to wrap this up, we have two men who likely never made it to the place they destroyed their lives for.
Right.
We have a map full of the names of people who never went there. And we have the true heroes, the Inuit guides like Uta and Ibir Bing, and Americans like Matthew Henson who were erased from the story for generations.
It's a tragedy, but a fascinating one. It tells you so much about what we choose to value.
It certainly is. And it leaves us with a question for you, the listener. If neither man actually made it, does it matter who got there first? Or is the story of their shared obsession, their shared failure, more telling than any story of success ever could be?
I think the failure is where the truth lies. Always.
The sobering thought to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through the ice today. This was fascinating.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for listening. Stay warm, keep your boots on your feet and not in your soup, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.